The courtroom in Millbrook, Texas, fell silent as Judge Harold Weiss held up a torn, yellowed piece of paper between two fingers, like it was something dirty. "This," he said, smirking at the old farmer standing alone at the table, "is what you're basing your entire defense on?" Laughter rippled through the gallery. Walter Hayes, 73 years old, dirt still under his fingernails from the morning's chores, didn't flinch. He'd been waiting 40 years for this moment. He didn't know it yet, but in the next 10 minutes, that same judge's smile would disappear completely. "Before we continue, tell me in the comments, what state are you watching from tonight?" Judge Weiss set the document down on his desk like it was already forgotten, sliding it toward the corporation's lawyer, a sharp young man named Preston Cole, who barely looked at it before scoffing. "Your Honor, we've already established the plaintiff has no valid claim. This is a piece of paper my client's legal team examined months ago. It's irrelevant." Silence was Walter's only response. He'd learned a long time ago that in rooms like this, saying nothing served him better than defending himself to people who'd already made up their minds. 3 years earlier, Cole's employer, a company called Brannigan Resource Group, had started buying land around Millbrook, quietly, one ranch at a time. Offers came in fast, usually to families who were behind on payments or too old to fight anymore. Walter's neighbors sold one by one: the Petersons, the Ruiz family, Old Man Dutton, who'd farmed the same 400 acres his whole life. Each time, Walter watched another truck pull away for the last time, another sold sign go up along Route 9. Dust still hung in the air the day Brannigan's man came to Walter's door with a check for $800,000. Walter didn't even open the envelope. He remembered his father, sitting on the porch of that same house 40 years earlier, pressing a folded paper into young Walter's hands. "Don't ever let this go," his father had said. "Doesn't matter what anybody offers you. Doesn't matter what anybody tells you it's worth. You keep this safe, and someday, it'll matter more than you know." Walter never fully understood what the paper was. It was old. Older than his father. Maybe older than the county itself. Water-stained, torn along one edge, written in language that looked more like a land grant than a modern deed. He'd kept it in a cigar box in his closet for decades, taking it out only to dust it off and put it back. When Brannigan's lawyers filed to seize the land under eminent domain claims, backed quietly by local officials who'd been generously supported during their campaigns, Walter's neighbors told him not to bother fighting. "You'll lose the land either way," Dutton had warned him. "At least take the money." 2 hours away sat the county archive, and that's where Walter drove instead. He spent 3 days there, going through records nobody had touched in half a century. What he found made him certain enough to stand alone in this courtroom against a team of 6 lawyers. Now, watching Cole toss his father's paper aside like garbage, Walter finally spoke. "Your Honor, before you rule, I'd ask that someone actually read what's written on that page." The judge sighed, clearly annoyed. "Mr. Hayes, we don't have time for—" "It'll take less than a minute," Walter said quietly, "and I think it changes everything you think you know about this case." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Judge Weiss glanced at the clock, clearly irritated, then at Cole, who simply shrugged as if humoring an old man was beneath him. "Fine. Clerk, read it into the record. Let's move this along." The clerk, a young woman named Denise, who'd been quietly watching Walter's face the whole trial, picked up the document carefully, almost reverently, and began to unfold it under the light. Before she starts reading, if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just another courtroom drama. If you want more stories like Walter's, ordinary people standing up against powerful institutions and coming out on top, hit subscribe now, because what happens next is the moment this entire case turns. "To whom it may concern," Denise read aloud, her voice growing steadier with each line. The language was formal, old-fashioned, referencing boundaries by creek beds and old survey markers instead of GPS coordinates. Line by line, a grant emerged, dated decades before anyone in that courtroom had been born, transferring rights to the land and all subsurface and water resources therein to a name Walter recognized instantly: his great-grandfather. Cole straightened in his chair. "Your Honor, this is clearly just a historical curiosity. It has no legal bearing on a modern eminent domain claim." But Judge Weiss wasn't looking at Cole anymore. His eyes were fixed on the paper in Denise's hands, on a seal stamped in the corner that he clearly recognized, one that predated the county's current land records entirely, one issued directly by the state before certain modern statutes had ever been written. "Where," the judge said slowly, Did you get this?" Walter answered calmly. "My father gave it to me. His father gave it to him. As far as I know, it's been in my family since before this courtroom existed." Cole tried to interject again, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him. Carefully, he reached for the document himself, turning it over, examining the seal more closely, comparing it, Walter realized, to something already sitting on his own desk, a copy of Brannigan's original land survey. Something in Judge Weiss's expression began to shift. Not anger, not confusion, something closer to alarm, because if this paper was authentic, and everything about it, the seal, the language, the county archive stamps, Walter had gathered over his 3 days of research, suggested it absolutely. Then Brannigan Resource Group's entire claim to this land, the deal that had already displaced a dozen families, was built on a foundation that had never legally existed in the first place. This wasn't just about Walter Hayes's ranch anymore. Everyone in that courtroom was starting to understand it. Silence swallowed the courtroom whole as Judge Weiss lowered the document. And for the first time in the entire trial, he wasn't smirking. He wasn't even looking at Walter. His eyes were locked on Preston Cole, and the question in them was one every person in that room could read clearly. "Your Honor?" Cole started. But his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "This document," the judge said, holding the paper now with something closer to caution than dismissal, "predates the entire mineral rights framework your client's claim relies on. If this seal is authentic, and I have no immediate reason to believe it isn't, this doesn't just protect Mr. Hayes's surface land, it protects everything beneath it. Water rights, mineral rights, rights that would have transferred with every inch of land your client has already acquired in this county." Judge Weiss's own face had gone pale, not from anger, from the sudden, sinking realization of what he'd almost dismissed with a smirk 10 minutes earlier. Beside him, Preston Cole looked no steadier, flipping frantically through his files, whispering something urgent to the associate beside him. 3 days in that archive hadn't just confirmed Walter's paper was real, it had let him trace exactly how far its implications reached. His great-grandfather hadn't just owned his own 400 acres. The original grant, back when the region was first being surveyed, had included rights across a much larger stretch of land, rights that had quietly been assumed lost or void by everyone who came after, including, apparently, the county itself. Every family who had sold to Brannigan over the past 3 years, the Petersons, the Ruiz family, Old Man Dutton, had unknowingly sold land that came with resource rights never actually Brannigan's to acquire, because those rights had never legally left the Hayes family in the first place. "Judge Weiss," Walter said, his voice steady but for the first time slightly shaking, "I'm not asking the court to just save my ranch. I'm asking the court to recognize that Brannigan Resource Group has spent 3 years buying land in this county under a claim that isn't legally sound. Every deal they've made rests on a mineral and water rights structure that this document proves was never theirs to sell." Papers rustled as Cole dug through his files, his composure completely gone now. The judge closed his eyes briefly, clearly understanding the magnitude of what was unfolding. Not just a single farmer's case, but potentially every transaction Brannigan had completed in Millbrook County over the past 3 years. "This court," Judge Weiss finally said, his voice heavier than before, "will need time to verify the authenticity of this document through the state archive. Until that verification is complete, I am issuing an immediate injunction halting any further land transfers or development activity related to Brannigan Resource Group's claims in this county." Nothing about Preston Cole's expression suggested he was ready for what came next. Hushed, urgent conversation broke out across the courtroom. Reporters who'd shown up expecting a routine ruling were suddenly typing furiously into their phones. Cole was on his phone before he'd even left the building, and Walter later learned that call had gone straight to Brannigan's regional legal team, who spent the rest of that week scrambling to understand exactly how deep the exposure went. Within 2 weeks, the state archive confirmed what Walter already knew. The document was authentic. More than that, it triggered a review of every land transaction Brannigan Resource Group had completed in the county over the previous 3 years. Families who had sold their land for a fraction of what it was worth, believing they had no other choice, suddenly had legal standing to challenge those sales. Old Man Dutton called him that same week, his voice thick with disbelief. "Walter, I signed away my daddy's mineral rights for $800,000. You're telling me they were never even legally Brannigan's to buy? No gloating passed Walter's lips, even though he'd have been within his rights to say, "I told you so." He simply told Dutton what his own father had told him decades earlier, that some things aren't about the money you're offered today, they're about honoring what the people before you protected, sometimes without even fully understanding why. Back in Millbrook, the town began to see Walter differently, not as the stubborn old farmer who wouldn't take a good deal, but as the man who quietly, patiently, held on to something everyone else had been ready to throw away, and in doing so, protected far more than just his own 400 acres. Months later, in his final ruling, Judge Weiss didn't just dismiss Brannigan's claim against Walter's property. He referred the broader pattern of acquisitions to the state attorney general's office for review, citing serious concerns about how vulnerable rural landowners had been targeted. Using legal pressure, many of them had no resources to fight. 400 acres, still farmed the same way, still holding the same name on the deed. Walter Hayes never sold. The cigar box that once held his father's document now sits empty in a bank safety deposit box, the paper itself preserved under glass at the County Historical Society, a reminder of what one torn piece of paper was able to undo. Sometimes, the most valuable thing your family leaves you isn't money. It's the thing everyone else tells you to give up. Walter held on when it made no sense to, and it saved more than his own land. If stories like this move you, subscribe, because we've got more coming every single week.